Good morning. The Senate Armed Services Committee meets this morning to receive testimony on the posture of U.S. Central Command, Africa Command, and Special Operations Command in the context of our review and oversight of the fiscal year 2017 defense budget. We're pleased to welcome our witnesses, General Austin, General Rodriguez, and General Votel. We thank each of you for decades of distinguished service and for your leadership of our men and women in uniform. I'd like to extend special thanks to General Austin and General Rodriguez, as this may be their last appearance before this committee. Our nation's most distinguished national security leaders have testified before this committee repeatedly that we're witnessing the unraveling of the rules-based international order. And nowhere is this unraveling more visible or more dangerous than the Middle East. From North Africa to South Asia, state authority and the balance of power are breaking down. This emerging vacuum has been filled by the most extreme and anti-American of forces, Sunni terrorist groups such as ISIL and al-Qaeda, Shiite extremists such as the Islamic Republic of Iran and its proxies, and the imperial ambitions of Vladimir Putin. As a result, almost every Middle Eastern country is now a battleground or a combatant in one or more wars. To wit, this morning's Wall Street, New York Times, entitled Pentagon Plan to Fight ISIS in Libya Includes Barrage of Airstrikes. These are diverse, complex, and trans-regional threats to our military confronts every day across CENTCOM, AFRICOM, and SOCOM lines of responsibilities. As this committee continues its review of the Goldwater-Nichols Act, we're interested to hear our witnesses' views as to whether the current structure best enables us to succeed in the strategic environment of global and trans-regional threats in the 21st century and what reforms we might consider. This is critical because there are already too many obstacles to success as it is. Time and again, politically driven strategy, micromanagement, and misguided reductions in defense spending have made our military's job more difficult. This has been especially true for our special operations forces. More than 15 years of continuous deployments, due in part to an over-reliance on their unique capabilities, has led to unprecedented stress on the force. As the threats we face impose greater demands on our special operators and their families, we must be vigilant and provide the necessary support to maintain their vital capabilities, not just in direct action, but in building partnership capacity across CENTCOM and AFRICOM. While we marvel at our special operations forces, we must remember they're just one part of our force and our strategy. They're not a magic solution to every problem or a substitute for coherent strategy, as the administration's, quote, light footprint approach in the Middle East has demonstrated repeatedly. Despite temporary relief from the arbitrary spending caps imposed by the Budget Control Act, we're still placing an unnecessary and dangerous burden on the backs of our service members in the CENTCOM and AFRICOM theaters. President Obama's fiscal year 17 defense budget request does little to relieve that burden. Secretary Carter has said the military is at a major inflection point requiring urgent and simultaneous investments in next-generation technologies and in current operations, such as a 50% increase in funding for the fight against ISIL. In view of these needs, President Obama should have requested a defense budget that reflects the scale and scope of the national security threats we face. Instead, he chose to request the lowest level of defense spending authorized by last year's budget agreement and submit a defense budget that is actually less in real dollars than last year, despite the fact that operational requirements have grown. This comes as a little surprise from an administration that for the past 7 years has sought to scale back America's involvement in and commitment to the Middle East. In moments of consequence, Iran's Green Revolution, Libya after the fall of Gaddafi, withdrawal from Iraq, and the crossing of the chemical red line in Syria, this president walked away and ignored the lessons of history that power abhors a vacuum. that wars don't end because politicians say so, that the perils of indecision and inaction often outweigh the risks of action, and that while America cannot solve the problems of the Middle East, American leadership is indispensable to managing them. With major policy decisions hanging in the balance right now, our nation cannot afford to ignore these lessons again. In Afghanistan, the President has told our enemies that we will proceed with a calendar-based decision to cut U.S. troop presence in half by the end of this year. And he's yet to explain the consequences of reducing U.S. troop levels from 9,800 to 5,500, significant reductions to ISR and close air support capacity, diminished operational flexibility of U.S. counterterrorism forces, and perhaps most damaging of all, the end of U.S. train, advise, and assist mission at all, but the highest levels of the Afghan military precisely when this support is needed most. What all this translates to is risk. Risk that problems and contingencies once addressed in days will be addressed in months. That is, if they are addressed at all. Risk that sudden tactical or operational setbacks that would have been in our power to reverse will put Afghanistan on a path to strategic failure we will be powerless to stop, and risk that the gains won by the sacrifices of American and Afghan troops will be squandered. In Iraq and Syria, the artificial limitation on troop levels ties the hands of our military commanders and makes our troops more vulnerable to attack and much less likely to succeed. The President has inched forward with incremental increases in needed capabilities. But this misguided gradualism serves only to allow the enemy to adjust before these capabilities ever make a difference. It is clear to me from my conversations with our military commanders, both on the ground and in the Pentagon, that they've been reduced from considering what will it take to win to what will I be allowed to do. And it is our troops and our national security that are paying the price. Africa has emerged as the next front of the global war on terror, with ISIL, al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and al-Shabaab commanding territory and launching successful attacks throughout the continent. Most alarming, ISIL now commands an army of 5,000 fighters in Libya. While the threat in Asia continues to metastasize, while the threat in Africa continues to metastasize, our military commanders are being forced to do more with less, starved for resources, and denied timely and flexible authorities to take advantage of battlefield opportunities and halt the advance of extremism. In the Gulf, the President is failing to live up to the promises made at the Camp David Summit in May 2015. For example, the President committed to fast-tracking arms transfers to our Gulf partners, but fighter aircraft sales for Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain that could help thwart Iranian hegemonic ambitions are languishing on the shelf, gathering dust. Once again, American credibility is disintegrating as the malign influence of Iran and Russia continues to grow. This administration's great failure to date has not been that it makes mistakes. It is rather that it has failed, or perhaps refused, to learn from them. And unless we chart a new course, it may well be this administration's lasting legacy. Senator Reid.